Hey YouTube, this is John from SysEng Quick. I cut yesterday's video into two parts, so this is part two, where we template the niri configuration and actually show you that the playbooks all still work. Let's get started. The last thing I want to do is template the niri config file itself. Now this one is complicated and I'm not sure it's the best way to do it, but it's the way I'm going to do it. So like with the waybar config, there's a lot of options in here that people may feel very strongly about, and it would be way too complicated to specify options and variables for every single thing you might want to change. However, I've made some compromises with how I'm going to do this. So there are several things I'm calling config sections, like input and layout. And these will simply be giant blocks of text that you can override from the defaults. So we'll place all these sections as defaults, and we'll put them into the config file verbatim. If you want to replace any of these sections, you simply update that variable. You can have as much flexibility as you need without being constrained by how I've decided to implement the template. Other things I think make a bit more sense. For instance, outputs is kind of like a section, but you have multiple of them. So each one of these output names needs its own section for different monitors if you have more than one, like I do. There are several other things in here, and a lot of things that aren't even specified in this default configuration. I've tried to use the wiki to find these things out, but it's possible there are things I have missed. I guess we're going to find out in the future. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start working on some data definitions in our argument specs. Okay, I let AI write some of this for me, so there may be some errors. I guess we'll see soon. So first, I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this stuff. So we have a ton of variables you might have. One for each of the sections, like animations, binds, clipboards. These are all strings that we're going to place in the configuration in their specific sections. And I've taken all the ones I found in the wiki. Although there might be more, they won't be placed in the template right now. So if new configuration sections get added, the template will need to be updated. But I think it's good for now. There are a few of these things that are not simply strings. For instance, the environment, if you want to add environment variables, is a dictionary of key value pairs. I think that's the best way to handle the environment, and it makes the most sense to me. Let's see. There are layout rules, which are lists of string elements, just like I talked about with the outputs. Same thing for the outputs. Actually, that's not quite true. The layout rules, there are multiple sections, but they're not named. So they are a list of strings rather than the outputs, which is a dictionary of string values. So that's the difference between layout rules, window rules, and outputs. Some things are simple booleans, like prefer no client-side decorations, so I made that a boolean, and we are defaulting this to be true. So let's go ahead and add the default of true in there. There is a screenshot path. By default, it puts it in picture screenshots and gives it a timestamp in there. And I want to make sure you can change this if you want to, or make it null if you don't want to. The KDL spawn at startup and spawn shell at startup, these are just commands. So we're going to have a list of strings for all the commands. And yeah, that covers everything. So there's a lot of options and sections, but I think all of this is here. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and make our defaults. Once again, I'm going to paste in all my defaults. There's a lot of stuff in here. Now, I did try to clean up some of this stuff. I have changed some of the defaults from the original default config, and I've tried to remove most of the comments. I figure if you're templating the file, you don't really care about the comments. You can go look at the wiki to find out what everything is. So let's take a look at all these defaults. And yes, I just pasted in like 230 lines. Most of this is from the default configuration, but there are a few things for me as well. So a lot of these sections, there was nothing in them. So I went ahead and made sure they had a default null value. So we'll have the variable, but it will be none, and we won't get any undefined variable issues with Ansible. So here are our keyboard binds. These are all the things that are in the default keybinds. I actually like the default keybinds. They work really well for me. So I went ahead and did that. Let me check one thing real quick. Where is the terminal one? I do have the terminal set to alacrity. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit annoying to change any one keybind here because you have to replace the entire section. But I figure if you're changing keybinds, you probably know more or less what you want. So I just went ahead and left it there. If I think of a better idea, I'll do that. But I really didn't want to have a dictionary of every possible one of these to every possible command you could do. I mean, that is an option. I could have made that, but I just really didn't like that. But honestly, to replace a single keybind, I'm going to have to replace this. So I might do that. But for me, I'll probably just change this default to switch it from alacrity to being kitty because that's my preferred terminal. But other than that, if you want to change the keybinds right now, well, you're changing all of them. So you copy this, you change them. Future John here, I just couldn't leave it alone. I hated the thought of having to replace this entire section if you only want to change one or two keybinds. So I thought the best thing to do would be to leave this as a string section because it'll be much easier to copy existing configurations rather than transferring all these to key value pairs. I really didn't want to do that. And then I made this other dictionary here, niri KDL binds extra. The keys are going to be keybinds, and the values is going to be whatever action you want to take. Now, I'm going to replace this in the defaults and not put it here, so at the end, this will going to be an empty dictionary. But I was just testing that it works, and it does. So we are going to replace the mod t with kitty rather than the default of alacrity. So alacrity is specified here, and we're going to override that. Now, if mod t didn't exist, it would add it as a new key to the end of this string. So we'll be able to add or replace strings because you can't have two keybinds that are identical in the configuration or it throws an error. So to do this, I had AI help me write this monstrosity. We are first getting a dictionary. We're going to turn this giant string into a dictionary of key value pairs. We're doing that by iterating over every line in this string. And then we're going to make sure that we don't have any empty lines. We're going to trim the line to make sure it's empty, and then only select for things which are not empty. Then we're going to split the line, and here's why we have to make sure we don't have an empty line, because if we do, we don't have a key value pair to split on. Then we are going to add to our dictionary the key value pair. So this first 4 is just turning our string value into key value dictionary. This is the automated way of doing this manually and turning this all into key value pairs, which I did not want to do. Then we go over every item that's in the result, which we combine with the extra keybinds, and then we do key values again. And this gets us our final string section. So there we go, a slightly better way to do the keybinds and allow you to do a bit of extra customization. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you have a better idea than I came up with. Okay, the clipboard, they didn't have this in here, but I went ahead and added the disable primary there. I'm not sure I want this. It's something I want to test out, but on Unix, there is this tradition in X Windows where you can highlight stuff, and then it goes into the middle click mouse paste buffer. That is sometimes confusing. So I try to go paste things, and I use Control-Shift-V instead of pasting it from the mouse. And the mouse paste is kind of awkward because I might accidentally scroll when I'm pasting, so I kind of hate that. So I thought I'd try disabling it since that's an option in Niri and see if I like that better. I may not, I may change it back, but that's what I did so far right now. Okay, again, a lot of these sections were just empty, so I'm setting default values. I did add environment variables. I'm setting the Electron Ozone platform hit to be automatic. This is what will launch VS Code in Wayland mode. That's the way I found to get this to work. There's a lot of information about how to make VS Code launch in Wayland, and it's changed a lot over time, it seems, but this is what is working right now. I'll fix it in the future if I have to, I guess. The hotkey overlay, their default was not to skip this at startup. That makes sense for a new user, but most people probably don't want that. So I went ahead and added the skip at startup, and you can launch that manually with mod shift and with mod question or mod shift / So there you go. Okay, the niri key input, again, I kept all of this. I did change some of the defaults for the touchpad. I added the DWT and DWTP options, so disable while typing, disable while track pointing. So everything else is defaults. Layout rules, they didn't have any in the default. I don't plan to have any now, so that's blank, but we'll see how they work shortly. This layout, again, I left everything as the defaults. I like the way it looks, so I'm happy with this. If you don't like the way it looks, you're probably going to change a lot, so I don't feel too bad, or at least not nearly as bad as I did about the binds, changing one keyboard, or one keybind. I think if you're going to change something, you're going to change a lot of stuff. I don't see anyone just saying, you know, I need a 75% proportion one. I don't think so. Maybe you will, I don't know. But that wasn't something that made sense to me, so I didn't do that. Okay, here's our outputs, and by default we have the virtual monitor. You will have to configure this because you're probably not going to be running this on a Proxmox server or an OpenStack or some other QEMU host. You're going to have the virtual one monitor. But I went ahead and put it in here because we will want this for our default config for our test environment. Prefer no CSD, that is true. Here's our default screenshot path, but if you gave it a null value, we would not save screenshots to disk. So that's how you can specify that in the config as well. I'm not using any of these spawn at startup or spawn shell at startup commands, so I left those blank, but they are options. Another section here on switch events. Window rules, there were a couple in the default config, but I didn't feel they were that important, so I went ahead and left them out. If you want window rules, it's just a section for each window rule you want, and I figure you're going to want to go ahead and put the entire section in there. So we'll see how to specify that probably some point in the future, but I think it's all good for now. One thing to note, I made all of these sections as blocks of text, and then I trimmed the final new line with the dash. So we'll just have this in here, mode, and we're going to indent this so the config looks the same as it does in the default config we have now. Okay, there are our default values. Let's go see about making a template. So let's make a new file in our templates folder. We're going to call this niri config kdl.j2. So in our configuration, let's start by adding some comments at the top to tell you where the wiki is in case you want to look and see what this is. Then let's go ahead and add the environment variables. So I'll put the section right here. And I'll say for every key value pair in niri KDL environment items, we're just going to use key and value. And we need to make sure the value is quoted. Okay, that's our section. I think we should be indenting this as well, so let me do that too. Okay, next I'm going to go for the monitor output. So let's go ahead and make a section for our outputs. And I have put things in here in case you don't have any. So here is our output section. So again, for key value pairs in niri KDL outputs, we're going to say the output, the key is going to be the key for the output. And then here, we're going to put the value, and here we're using the indent filter. So we can indent everything to make sure it is indented, just like our lines right over here that we did manually. Okay, I want to go ahead and do layout rules and window rules next. They are very similar, so I'll do them both at the same time. The layout rules for every rule in the KDL layout rules, and this is a list, not a dictionary. So we just make a section, layout rule, and then we indent the rule that we have. Same thing for our window rules, and I've got these comments here in case you don't have any, so you don't wonder why there are blank lines in your templates, or at least that's why I put them there. Now let's go ahead and take care of client-side decorations. Do we want them? Do we not? So I'm going to make a prefix here. The prefix will be empty if we are preferring no CSDs. Otherwise, we're going to use the comment prefix. So we'll put that in here, and we'll say prefer no CSD. This is just a top-level configuration variable. After that, let's go ahead and set the screenshot path. This one's a bit more involved. We're going to set a path variable, and we're going to say screenshot path is that path variable. So if we actually have a screenshot path, in other words, it's not null, then what we want is to quote the path. So I'm quoting and concatenating the path with the quote marks. Otherwise, we need the literal value null for KDL, and it must not be quoted. So I can't quote it here because then null would be quoted, and it would put everything in null wherever that is. Okay, so there is our prefixes. So what about our spawn at startup applications? Let's go ahead and make those as well. So our spawn at startup apps. So for app in niri KDL spawn at startup, this is the list again. We do spawn at startup, and then we quote the command. Same thing for the spawn shell at startup. Exact same thing. So we just have these two things right in here. Okay, this didn't mean to copy that yet, but that's part of this. So the last thing we're going to do is add our sections. So we'll go ahead and say for every section in niri KDL sections, we're going to set the section name to be a replacement of the section where we have underscores instead of dashes, because in the configuration we need the names to have dashes, but with our variables we need them to be underscore because Python does not have dashes in its identifiers. Then we get the contents, and the contents is going to be our variables. So we'll have niri KDL plus our section. This is our section, which is literally going to be with the underscores, not the dashes. So we'll have niri underscore KDL underscore binds, for instance, or something else like that. Then we're going to make a new prefix. So some of these sections are going to be blank. Rather than having blank lines or not putting them in here, I'm going to go ahead and comment them out using the KDL style. So we'll just put this before the section to comment it out entirely. So here is our section name. We got that from our section. And then if we have section contents, we're going to add that, and we're going to indent it, making sure we indent the first line. And that is everything for our configuration. Okay, I know that is a lot, but I hope that it all mostly makes sense. Some of these lines run together in odd way. This was done so that the template actually renders the file with the spacing that I like. It is sometimes difficult to get the file to look exactly the way you want, but I think this does. So I think we're ready to go ahead and test this. Oh wait, no, we're not. I have one more thing I need to add. I needed to find these niri KDL sections. So let's go ahead and define that in our vars file. So over here in niri KDL sections, we have these sections: animations, binds, clipboards, and here we have ones that have underscores instead of dashes, so config notifications for our variable versus our other section there. Yeah, I think those are all of our sections, so we need to move this config file. It's no longer a config file, it's a config template. So let's go ahead and put that in our config template. Let's go ahead and move that over here. And I think, yeah, that should be everything. We're no longer copying the niri config file, we are templating the niri config file. Okay, let's try it out. Okay, I fixed a couple of typos, so let's see if this works. I'm going to run ansible playbook syseng quick fedora niri, and I'm going to just do the niri tags. Here is our VM. I rolled it back to a snapshot so we can see the entire process. And you can see that on boot, it doesn't start the graphical login manager. Did I fix that bug? Well, let's find out. Well, it does start it after the play runs. What about on boot? Let's go ahead and hit reboot. Okay, now it does start on boot. Okay, that looks good. Let's see what our play actually did. So it installed some niri packages. It has to install the Mate Polkit service that I added between episodes. Let's see, what else did we do? We switched the default target to graphical target. That's why it works on boot now. I added the swaylock config directory that I forgot to do while I was making the rest of the changes to the swaylock template. We've templated both of our niri configurations, our niri configuration itself, and the swaylock config. We've added the Mate Polkit service, and we've updated our sway idle service based on our template. The sway background service didn't change because we have the same default background image that we did otherwise. We are adding the Mate Polkit to our niri service once. And then we need to run the system control user daemon reload and the SDDM graphical login manager handlers. Okay, so everything seems like it worked. Let's go see if we can log in and see what it looks like on the system. Okay, so we have logged in and it looks pretty much the same. I mean, it was bound to, right? Because we didn't actually change anything. We just changed how we supplied values to it. So nothing should actually be different. But let's see what we can do to make sure things actually look okay. So let's go into our config, let's go into niri, and let's look at config.kdl. Yeah, now we have our templated configuration. We've got our environment variables, we've got our modes, we've got no layout or window rules. We are preferring no client-side decorations. That's why Alacritty didn't have any. We've got our default screenshot path. It's not null. We don't have any spawn at startup apps. For things that are blank, like the animation section, we are commenting them out. But we've got our binds defined, and everything else is looking pretty good, I think. We do have the primary clipboard disabled, so if I were to highlight this and then paste it, yeah, that did not work. But if I highlight this and do Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, that works. Not sure I'll keep that, but it was something I wanted to look at, so I thought I would. Inputs all there. Yeah, this config looks great, and it is just the same defaults we had before, but now we have a way to template it. What about our sway lock configuration? How does that look? We've got our color, we are ignoring empty passwords, and we are showing the failed attempts. So let's see what happens when we do that. It's a hard password to type for some reason. It's a secret to everybody. Yeah, that worked. So everything looks good for our sway lock configuration. What about our sway idle stuff? Did that get configured right? Well, our sway background was obviously already correct. What about our sway idle service? Yeah, that looks exactly like it's supposed to. Before sleep, we lock the screen. We've got our two timeouts of 900 and 960, and we restart on failure. Yeah, the templates look great. Okay, the other thing was the system theme, but again, that didn't change because it was the default. So yeah, there we go. We have completely templated all of our niri stuff, or at least most of it. Well, I'm sure this episode is running very long, so I hope you have enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you know what to do. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. Come back and see us next time, and we'll do something else. I've got a few more ideas for other things I want to template, like the bash config, or the git config, or vim config, things like that. All of those dot files that might be slightly different on different machines, I'd like to have a way to do those configurations as well. All right, thanks for watching. See you next time.